On Christmas Day, 1998, a young couple checked into the Stardust Casino in Las Vegas with plans to celebrate their first holiday together. By midnight, their room was empty, their belongings untouched, and security footage showed them walking toward the parking garage, but never emerging. For 26 years, their families searched for answers. Then, in December 2024, a construction crew demolishing an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Vegas found something that would unravel a conspiracy of silence, obsession, and methodical evil that had claimed not 2 victims, but 17. This is their story. If you're interested in more deeply researched true crime mysteries, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. The neon glow of the Las Vegas Strip painted the night sky in shades of electric pink and gold as Sarah Chen pressed her face against the passenger window of the taxi, her breath fogging the glass. Beside her, Michael Torres squeezed her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles across her knuckles. "First Christmas away from home," she said softly, watching the crowds of tourists flowing between casinos like rivers of light and laughter. "First of many," Michael replied, lifting her hand to his lips. "When we're old and gray, we'll tell our grandkids about the time we spent Christmas in Vegas." Sarah turned to him, her dark eyes reflecting the kaleidoscope of lights outside. "You think about things like that? Grandkids? With you? All the time." The taxi pulled up to the Stardust Casino, its facade a testament to old Vegas glamour slowly being overtaken by the newer, flashier resorts sprouting along the Strip. They climbed out into the warm desert night, so different from the Chicago winter they'd left behind. As Michael paid the driver, Sarah noticed a man standing near the valet station, partially obscured by shadow. He wore a dark maintenance uniform, and something about his stillness caught her attention. Most people on the Strip were in motion, propelled by excitement or exhaustion, but this man simply watched. When their eyes met, he smiled, a strange, knowing smile that made her skin prickle with unease. "Sarah?" Michael's voice pulled her back. "You ready?" She looked again, but the man had vanished into the crowd. "Yeah," she said, shaking off the feeling. "Let's go celebrate." They walked through the casino's revolving doors into a world of ringing slot machines and cigarette smoke, entirely unaware that they had just been marked. Behind them, the man in the maintenance uniform followed at a careful distance, his smile widening as he pulled a small notebook from his pocket and made a notation. Beside 2 names already written there, he added a 3rd entry. "Christmas Day, the couple from Chicago. Young love burns brightest." Rebecca Chen sat in the corner booth of the Silver Spoon Diner in Henderson, Nevada, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had long since gone cold. Across from her, Detective Laura Vasquez of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department reviewed a thin file folder, her expression carefully neutral. The morning sun streaming through the diner's windows seemed too bright, too cheerful for the conversation they were about to have. "Mrs. Chen," Detective Vasquez began, then corrected herself. "Ms. Chen, I apologize. I know you kept your maiden name." "It's fine," Rebecca said, though her voice was hollow. "After 26 years, the formalities don't matter much anymore." The detective nodded, studying the woman across from her. Rebecca Chen was 52 now, her black hair threaded with silver, her face bearing the particular weariness that came from decades of unanswered questions. She had aged, as everyone did, but there was something else, a vigilance in her eyes, as if she had never stopped searching the crowds for her daughter's face. "You said on the phone that you had new information," Rebecca continued, leaning forward slightly. "About Sarah." Detective Vasquez closed the folder and met her gaze directly. 3 days ago, a demolition crew was preparing to bring down the old Hendricks warehouse on Industrial Road. It's been abandoned since 2005, scheduled for demolition to make way for a new development. She paused, choosing her words carefully. One of the crew members noticed something unusual in the basement level. What they initially thought was a storage area turned out to be something else entirely. Rebecca's knuckles whitened around the coffee cup. What did they find? A concealed room. Soundproofed walls, reinforced door. Inside, we found evidence of long-term occupancy. Multiple sets of personal belongings, clothing, identification documents. The detective pulled a plastic evidence bag from her briefcase and placed it on the table between them. Inside was a silver bracelet, tarnished with age but still identifiable by the small charm dangling from it. A tiny book with Sarah engraved on the cover. Rebecca's hand trembled as she reached for the bag, then stopped, unable to touch it. That's hers. I gave it to her for her 20th birthday, right before she left for Vegas with Michael. We know, Detective Vasquez said quietly. We've also recovered other items belonging to Michael Torres. His wallet, his college ID, a watch his father identified yesterday. She hesitated. Ms. Chen, there's more. We found evidence suggesting that room was used to hold multiple people over an extended period of time. Years, possibly. The construction workers also discovered something else in a sealed section of the basement. Rebecca closed her eyes. Bodies? Remains, yes. The medical examiner is still working to identify them, but initial assessments suggest we're looking at possibly 15 to 17 individuals. The preservation conditions varied, but some of the remains show signs of... She stopped. I'm sorry. I shouldn't go into those details right now. Tell me everything, Rebecca said, opening her eyes. They were dry, as if she had exhausted her capacity for tears long ago. I've waited 26 years. I need to know what happened to my daughter. Detective Vasquez took a slow breath. The scene suggests a pattern of long-term captivity followed by murder. Whoever created that space did so methodically, over time. The room was designed to be completely hidden from any casual inspection of the warehouse. Based on the evidence we've collected so far, we believe your daughter and Michael Torres were taken there on Christmas night, 1998. You said taken. Do you know who did this? We're pursuing several leads. The warehouse was owned by a company called Desert Mirage Properties, which dissolved in 2003. We're tracking down everyone associated with that company, as well as anyone who had access to the building during the relevant time period. The detective leaned forward. Ms. Chen, I need to prepare you for what the investigation might reveal. Based on what we found in that room, your daughter and the other victims likely suffered significantly before they died. Rebecca stared at the bracelet in the evidence bag, her expression unreadable. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, almost clinical. How long were they kept there? We don't know yet. The forensic analysis will take time. But you have theories. Detective Vasquez nodded slowly. The condition of some items suggests months, possibly longer. We found journals, Ms. Chen. Several of the victims kept written records. I want to read them. That's not something I can authorize right now. They're evidence in an active investigation, and frankly, the content is... I don't care how disturbing they are, Rebecca interrupted. My daughter disappeared on Christmas Day when she was 23 years old. For 26 years, I've imagined every possible scenario. Whatever is in those journals cannot be worse than what I've already pictured. The detective studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I'll see what I can do. But not today. Today, I need you to walk me through everything you remember about Sarah's trip to Vegas. Every detail, no matter how small. People she mentioned, places she planned to visit, anyone she might have met before she disappeared. Rebecca finally released her grip on the cold coffee cup and reached into her purse, pulling out a worn notebook. I've been keeping records since the day she vanished. Every conversation with police, every lead, every strange call or letter I received from people claiming to have information. She opened it to reveal pages covered in meticulous handwriting, dates and times noted with precision. Where would you like me to start? The beginning, Detective Vasquez said, pulling out her own notepad. Tell me about Sarah and Michael. How they met, what their relationship was like, why they decided to spend Christmas in Vegas. Rebecca's expression softened slightly, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Sarah met Michael in a bookstore near Northwestern University in the fall of 1997. She was getting her master's in library science, and he was finishing his degree in architecture. She said he was reading Borges in the philosophy section, and she couldn't resist talking to someone who appreciated labyrinths. As Rebecca spoke, Detective Vasquez took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Outside the diner, the desert sun climbed higher, and the Monday morning traffic of Henderson hummed past with indifferent regularity. Inside, a mother recounted the last happy memories of her daughter, unaware that the investigation she had just triggered would expose a predator who had perfected his methods over decades, who had watched and waited and selected his victims with the patience of a spider in an elaborate web. The Hendricks warehouse stood like a monument to urban decay on a stretch of industrial road that time and progress had forgotten. Once a bustling storage facility for casino supplies and furniture, it had been abandoned for nearly 2 decades, its windows covered with plywood, its walls decorated with layers of graffiti. Now, the area around it was cordoned off with police tape, and a small city of white tents had sprung up in the parking lot, housing the forensic teams processing what had become the largest crime scene in Las Vegas history. Detective Laura Vasquez stood in the warehouse basement, her flashlight beam cutting through the dusty air. Beside her, Dr. Martin Reeves from the medical examiner's office reviewed preliminary findings on his tablet, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. The concealed room was professionally constructed, he said, gesturing toward the reinforced door that had been hidden behind a false wall. Whoever built this had knowledge of soundproofing and structural engineering. The walls contain layers of acoustic foam, the door has a commercial-grade lock system, and there's evidence of a ventilation system that was connected to the building's main HVAC, making it virtually undetectable. Laura stepped closer to the doorway, careful not to disturb the markers placed by the forensic team. The room beyond was approximately 15 by 20 feet, with concrete walls painted an institutional beige. Metal rings had been bolted into the floor and walls at regular intervals. A narrow cot sat in one corner, and opposite it, a small chemical toilet. "You said there were journals," Laura said. "Where were they found?" Dr. Reeves walked her to a corner of the room where evidence markers indicated the location of recovered items. "Hidden inside a loose section of the wall here. 3 spiral notebooks, different handwriting. We've photographed every page, but the originals are with the documents examiner now." "What do they say?" "I've only read portions, but they're essentially survival logs, dates, descriptions of their captor, attempts to track time passing. One of them includes sketches, architectural drawings of the warehouse layout, attempts to map possible escape routes." He paused, his professional detachment slipping slightly. "Detective, whoever was keeping these people was visiting them regularly, bringing food, water, sometimes other items. The journals suggest he engaged in conversations with them, asked them questions about their lives, their fears." "He was studying them," Laura said quietly. "That would be consistent with the psychological profile Dr. Hampton is developing. This wasn't about immediate gratification. The perpetrator was patient, methodical." Laura moved to examine the metal rings embedded in the walls, noting the wear patterns around them. "How many different DNA profiles have you recovered so far?" 19 distinct individuals, though some are only partial profiles. We're running them through CODIS and NAMUS databases now. The victims in the sealed section of the basement are proving more difficult to identify due to decomposition, but we're hopeful dental records and DNA will give us answers. "What about cause of death?" Dr. Reeves pulled up a series of photographs on his tablet. "Varied. Some show signs of asphyxiation, others appear to have died from blunt force trauma. There's evidence of starvation in several cases. The timeline is complex. These deaths occurred over many years, possibly dating back to the early 1990s. Laura felt a chill despite the basement's stale warmth. "We're looking at a serial killer who operated undetected for over a decade, possibly longer." "At minimum," Dr. Reeves agreed. "And whoever he is, he's methodical enough that he stopped or changed his pattern." The most recent evidence we've found dates to approximately 2003 or 2004, around the time the warehouse was abandoned. So either he's dead, in prison for something else, or he moved his operation somewhere we haven't found yet. Those are the working theories, yes. Laura's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to find a message from Detective Marcus Zhao, her partner. Found something in property records. Need you upstairs. She excused herself and climbed the metal stairs back to the main level of the warehouse, where Marcus stood near a makeshift command center of folding tables and laptops. He was 45, a 12-year veteran of the LVMPD, with silver-streaked black hair and the careful, methodical approach of someone who trusted evidence more than instinct. "What did you find?" Laura asked. Marcus turned his laptop to face her, displaying a scanned document. Desert Mirage Properties, the company that owned this warehouse, was a shell corporation. But I traced it through 3 layers of LLCs and found the actual person who controlled it. He pointed to a name on the screen. Robert Hendricks. He purchased this property in 1991, maintained minimal operations as a storage facility, and then quietly let the company dissolve in 2003 after the building was cited for code violations. Where's Hendricks now? That's the interesting part. He died in 2006 in a car accident in Arizona. Single vehicle collision, no witnesses. But before he died, he worked for over 15 years as a maintenance supervisor at various casinos on the Strip. Marcus pulled up another document, including the Stardust Casino, where Sarah Chen and Michael Torres were last seen. Laura felt the pieces beginning to align. He had access, opportunity, and a hidden location where he could keep victims without detection. "Do we have a photograph?" Marcus clicked through several files before pulling up a driver's license photo from 1998. The man staring back at them was in his early 40s, with thinning brown hair, an unremarkable face, and eyes that seemed to look through the camera rather than at it. "Send that to Rebecca Chen," Laura said. "See if Sarah ever mentioned anyone matching his description. Also, get me a list of every person who went missing in Vegas between 1990 and 2004. Cross-reference it with anyone who was staying at or visiting casinos where Hendricks worked." "Already in progress," Marcus replied. "But Laura, there's something else." He pulled up another photograph, this one more recent. Hendricks had a son, Daniel Hendricks, now 42 years old. According to records, he lived with his father until 1999, worked at the same casinos in various capacities. After his father's death, he moved to Arizona, then dropped off the grid around 2012. No employment records, no tax filings, nothing. Laura studied the younger Hendricks's photograph. He had his father's eyes, that same distant, analytical stare. "You think the son continued what the father started?" "I think it's worth finding out where Daniel Hendricks is right now and what he's been doing for the last 12 years. As Laura stared at the photograph, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Rebecca Chen's number. She answered immediately. "Detective Vasquez," Rebecca's voice came through, tight with barely controlled emotion. "I'm looking at the photo you sent me. The man from the driver's license." "Do you recognize him?" "I don't know. Maybe. Sarah mentioned someone once, in a letter she sent from Vegas. She said a maintenance worker at the Stardust had been helpful, told them about good restaurants off the Strip. She said he seemed lonely, that he told them he worked Christmas Day every year because he didn't have family." Rebecca's breath caught. She said he reminded her of a librarian, quiet and observant. She said those exact words. Quiet and observant. "Oh God, was that him?" Laura closed her eyes briefly. "Miss Chen, I need you to find that letter. Anything Sarah wrote or said about this man could be critical. I have it. I kept everything. Every letter, every postcard, every receipt from the credit card charges before they disappeared." Rebecca's voice steadied with grim purpose. "I'm looking at it right now. She mentioned his name. She wrote, 'The maintenance man, Robert.' Something told us about a Mexican place in Henderson." "Detective, is this him? Is this the person who took my daughter?" Laura looked at the driver's license photo again, at Robert Hendricks's carefully neutral expression. "We're investigating every possibility, Miss Chen. Can you email me a scan of that letter?" Yes, immediately." There was a pause. Then Rebecca asked, "Detective, you said there were 19 DNA profiles. Have you identified any of them besides Sarah and Michael?" "Not yet, but we're working on it." "How many of them were killed on Christmas Day?" The question caught Laura off guard. "What makes you ask that?" "Because my daughter disappeared on Christmas, and I've spent 26 years reading about every missing person case in Las Vegas, looking for patterns, looking for anything that might explain what happened to her. There are others, people who vanished on holidays, on special occasions. I've kept a list." Her voice dropped to nearly a whisper. "Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me this wasn't about taking people on days that should have been happy." Laura glanced at Marcus, who was already pulling up the recovered journals on his laptop. He scanned through the digital files, then looked up at her with a grim expression. He turned the screen around, showing a page from one of the journals. The handwriting was shaky but legible. "Day 47. Christmas has passed. He told me that's why he chose us, because we were celebrating, because we thought we were safe. He said joy makes the best contrast." "Ms. Chen," Laura said carefully, "I'll need to see that list you've compiled." The conference room at LVMPD headquarters smelled of stale coffee and the particular tension that came with breaking open a cold case that refused to stay buried. Laura stood before a whiteboard covered in photographs, dates, and connecting lines drawn in red marker. Around the table sat Marcus, Dr. Patricia Hampton, the forensic psychologist assigned to develop a profile, and Lieutenant Sarah Corrigan, who had authorized the formation of a task force dedicated to what the media was already calling the holiday killer. Rebecca Chen sat in the corner, technically present only as a consultant, but no one had the heart to ask her to leave. She had spent 26 years investigating her daughter's disappearance with more dedication than most professionals, and her compiled list of missing persons had proven disturbingly accurate. 15 confirmed matches so far, Marcus said, pointing to a cluster of photographs on the board. All individuals who disappeared in Las Vegas between 1992 and 2003, all on or within 24 hours of a major holiday. Christmas, New Year's Eve, Valentine's Day, 4th of July, Thanksgiving. Dr. Hampton adjusted her glasses, studying the faces. "The selection criteria appears consistent. Young couples, late 20s to early 30s, visiting Las Vegas for celebratory purposes. The perpetrator targeted people who were experiencing happiness, who had let their guard down." "Robert Hendricks worked at 4 different casinos during this period," Laura added, tapping a timeline she had constructed. "The Stardust, the Desert Inn, the Silver Slipper, and briefly at the Flamingo. Every single victim we've identified was staying at or had visited one of these establishments within 48 hours of their disappearance." Lieutenant Corrigan leaned forward, her expression grave. "What about the son, Daniel Hendricks? Where are we on locating him?" "Still working on it," Marcus replied. "Last confirmed sighting was in Phoenix in 2011. He was working at a commercial laundry service. After that, nothing. No credit card usage, no bank accounts, no tax returns. He either died, left the country, or went underground. Or he learned from his father's mistakes," Dr. Hampton interjected quietly. "If Daniel was involved in or aware of Robert's activities, he would have understood the importance of leaving no paper trail. The fact that he disappeared 2 years before the warehouse was discovered could be coincidental, but I doubt it." Rebecca spoke for the first time since the meeting began, her voice cutting through the professional discussion like a knife. "The journals you recovered. You said my daughter kept one. I want to read it." The room fell silent. Laura exchanged glances with Lieutenant Corrigan, who gave a slight nod. "Ms. Chen?" Laura began carefully. "The content is extremely disturbing. Sarah documented her captivity in significant detail. I'm not sure. I've spent 26 years imagining the worst," Rebecca interrupted. "Show me the truth. Whatever it is, I can handle it." Laura pulled a manila folder from her briefcase and slid it across the table. Inside were photocopies of Sarah's journal entries, the original still in evidence custody. Rebecca opened it with steady hands, though her face had gone pale. The first entry was dated December 26, 1998. Day 1. I'm writing this on the back of a receipt I found in my pocket. Michael is hurt. The man from the casino, Robert. He seemed so kind when he offered to help us find our car. We'd been walking in circles in the parking garage for 20 minutes. He said he knew a shortcut. The next thing I remember is waking up here, in this room. Michael has a cut on his head. He won't wake up. I don't know where we are. I can hear machinery sometimes, distant voices. Robert came to check on us. He brought water and said everything would be explained soon. He said we shouldn't have been so trusting. He said that's what makes us perfect. Rebecca read in silence, her finger tracing the words her daughter had written over 2 decades ago. The entries continued, documenting days that blurred into weeks. Sarah's handwriting changed over time, became smaller, more controlled, as if she were rationing the space on the pages she had managed to collect. Receipts, torn pieces of cardboard. Once, a page carefully removed from a book Robert had left in the room. Day 83. Robert comes every few days now. He brings food, sometimes books. He asks us questions about our lives, our families, what we plan to do with our futures. Yesterday, he asked me to describe the happiest moment of my life. I told him about the day Michael proposed, how we were at Navy Pier watching the sunset. Robert wrote everything down in a notebook. When I asked why, he said he was preserving us. He said most people go through life barely noticing their own joy until it's gone, but he helps people understand it, helps them see what they had. I don't understand what he means. Michael says we shouldn't engage with him, but I'm afraid if we don't cooperate, he'll stop bringing food. Rebecca's hands began to tremble around page 10. Laura started to reach for the folder, but Rebecca pulled it closer, protective of these final words from her daughter. Day 127. There's someone else here. We can hear them sometimes through the walls, crying or calling out. Robert won't tell us who it is. Michael tried to signal by knocking on the wall in Morse code, but no one responded. Or maybe the walls are too thick. Robert says we're part of something important, that we're helping him understand human nature. He showed us photographs today, other couples, other rooms like this one. Some of the photos looked old, yellowed. How long has he been doing this? How many others were there before us? The entries became more sporadic after that, sometimes weeks passing between notations. Sarah documented escape attempts, Michael's declining health, her own desperate efforts to maintain sanity by reciting poetry and reconstructing books she had read from memory. Day 201. Michael is very sick. Robert brought medicine, but it's not helping. His cough is getting worse. I begged Robert to take him to a hospital. Robert said that would defeat the purpose, that suffering is part of the process. Part of what process? What does he want from us? Today, he asked me if I still loved Michael as much as I did on Christmas Day. I said yes, more. He seemed disappointed by that answer. Rebecca closed the folder abruptly, her face ashen. How much more is there? The entries continue for approximately 8 months, Laura said gently. The final entry is dated August 15th, 1999. 8 months, Rebecca repeated, the words hollow. She was alive in that room for 8 months. Dr. Hampton leaned forward, her voice soft but clinical. Ms. Chen, your daughter's documentation is extraordinarily valuable from an investigative standpoint. She recorded details about the warehouse's layout, Robert Hendricks's schedule, even descriptions of sounds that might help us identify other locations or victims. Her strength and clarity of mind under those conditions is remarkable. She died anyway, Rebecca said flatly. Her strength didn't save her. No, Dr. Hampton agreed quietly, but it might save someone else. If Daniel Hendricks is continuing his father's work, understanding Robert's methodology could help us find him. Marcus cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the emotional weight in the room. We've made progress on the property front. Robert Hendricks owned 3 other buildings in Nevada and Arizona between 1990 and 2006. 2 have been demolished, but one still stands, a storage facility outside of Pahrump. We're getting warrants now to search it. Lieutenant Corrigan stood, signaling the meeting's end. I want updates every 6 hours. Marcus, coordinate with Pahrump PD on the search warrant. Laura, keep working the missing persons angle. Someone out there might have seen Daniel Hendricks more recently than 2011. Dr. Hampton, I need that profile completed by tomorrow morning. She turned to Rebecca. Ms. Chen, I can't officially involve you in this investigation, but your research has been invaluable. If you think of anything else, any detail Sarah might have mentioned, contact Detective Vasquez immediately. Rebecca nodded, carefully placing the folder back on the table as if it were made of glass. Detective, the final entry, August 15th. What did it say? Laura hesitated, then pulled out her phone and opened the scanned images. She found the last page of Sarah's journal and turned the screen toward Rebecca. The handwriting was barely legible, shaky and weak. Day 238. Michael died yesterday. Robert took his body away during the night. I'm alone now. I can hear someone else crying through the walls, someone new. Robert brought them in today. He told me it was time for me to move on too, that I'd fulfilled my purpose. He said I helped him understand that love doesn't survive suffering, that it transforms into something else, resentment, desperation, grief. He said he was grateful for the lesson. I don't want to die here. I don't want my last thought to be of this room. So I'm closing my eyes and thinking about Navy Pier, about the sunset, about the moment before Michael proposed when I knew what he was going to ask, and everything was still ahead of us. I'm thinking about that moment, and I'm staying there. I'm not here anymore. I'm not. The entry ended mid-sentence. Rebecca stared at the screen for a long moment, then carefully handed the phone back to Laura. Thank you, she said, her voice barely audible, for letting me know she tried to escape, even if only in her mind. She stood slowly, gathered her coat, and walked toward the door. As she reached it, she turned back. Find Daniel Hendricks, detective. Find him and make sure no one else has to read their child's last words like I just did. After Rebecca left, the room remained silent for several seconds. Finally, Dr. Hampton spoke, her professional detachment cracking slightly. Robert Hendricks wasn't just killing these people. He was conducting experiments, testing theories about human emotional endurance. The journals suggest he was trying to determine at what point love and joy break down under sustained trauma. He was a sadist with a philosophy degree, Marcus muttered darkly. More than that, Dr. Hampton replied. He was organized, patient, and intelligent enough to operate undetected for over a decade. If his son inherited those traits and learned from his father's eventual failure to remain hidden, Daniel Hendricks could be significantly more dangerous. He would know not to keep victims in a single location, not to maintain such detailed records, not to create a signature that could eventually be traced. Laura stared at the whiteboard, at the faces of 15 victims they had identified, and the empty spaces representing those they hadn't. Then we need to find him before he perfects what his father started. The storage facility outside Pahrump sat like a scab on the desert landscape, a collection of corrugated metal buildings surrounded by chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. It was 3 in the afternoon when Laura and Marcus pulled up behind 2 Pahrump PD cruisers, the Nevada sun beating down with relentless intensity that made the air shimmer. Sheriff Ray Coleman emerged from one of the cruisers, a weathered man in his late 50s with the deliberate movements of someone who had learned patience from years of rural law enforcement. Detectives, he greeted them with a nod. Your warrant came through about an hour ago. We've been waiting for you to arrive before entering the property. Laura shook his hand, grateful for his professionalism. Some local departments resented LVMPD involvement, territorial about jurisdiction, even when facing something that clearly exceeded their resources. We appreciate your cooperation, Sheriff. What can you tell us about this place? Desert Storage Solutions, officially. Been here since 1995, owned by Robert Hendricks through another one of his shell companies until it was sold in 2004 to a local businessman named Carl Voss. Voss runs it as a legitimate operation now. Storage units, some climate-controlled, mostly people keeping RVs and boats here. He's cooperative. Says he never met Hendricks personally. Everything was handled through lawyers and escrow. Did Voss keep any of Hendricks's records? Marcus asked. Says no. When he bought the property, it came empty except for one unit that Hendricks maintained separately. Had its own lock, its own access code. Voss honored the terms of the sale. Hendricks's estate kept that unit sealed and paid annual fees through an automated system until the payment stopped in 2012. Laura and Marcus exchanged glances. 2012, Laura repeated. The same year Daniel Hendricks disappeared. Sheriff Coleman led them through the gate and past rows of standard storage units until they reached the back corner of the property, where a single unit sat separated from the others by 20 feet of empty gravel. It was larger than the surrounding units, and unlike them, it had no roll-up door. Instead, a standard steel door with a commercial deadbolt was set into the corrugated wall. We haven't touched it, Sheriff Coleman said. Waited for you and your forensics team. The forensics van pulled up minutes later, and Laura watched as technicians prepared to breach the door. Dr. Reeves had made the drive from Las Vegas, his expression grim as he approached the sealed unit. Same pattern as the warehouse, he observed, examining the door's construction. Reinforced frame, soundproofing materials visible around the edges. Whoever built this knew exactly what they were doing. The bolt cutters made short work of the lock, and two officers pulled the door open slowly, their flashlights piercing the darkness beyond. The smell hit them immediately. Not the overwhelming stench of decay, but something older, mustier, disuse and stale air. Laura stepped inside, her flashlight beam revealing a space that made her skin crawl despite its ordinariness. The unit was divided into two sections. The front area contained a desk, filing cabinets, and shelves lined with notebooks and what appeared to be photographic equipment. The back section, separated by a hanging plastic curtain, held something that made her breath catch. A room within a room, constructed from soundproofing panels with another reinforced door. Jesus Christ, Marcus whispered beside her. He built another one. The forensics team moved in with their lights and cameras, documenting everything before anything was touched. Laura approached the filing cabinets carefully, noting they were unlocked. Inside, she found row after row of manila folders, each labeled with dates and initials. She pulled one at random, SC&MT 122598, 08 to 1599. Sarah Chen and Michael Torres. Her hands trembling slightly, she opened it to find photographs, surveillance shots of the couple at the Stardust Casino, walking through the parking garage, sitting at a restaurant. Notes in precise handwriting detailed their behaviors, conversations Robert Hendricks had overheard, assessments of their relationship dynamic. He stalked them for days before he took them, Laura said, her voice tight. Studied them, learned their patterns. Marcus was examining the notebooks on the shelves. These go back to 1991. Laura, he documented everything. Every victim, every day of their captivity, every conversation. He pulled one down and opened it, his face going pale. These are transcripts. He recorded them. Their pleas, their conversations with each other, everything. Dr. Reeves had moved to the back section, and now he called out, "Detectives, you need to see this." Laura and Marcus joined him beyond the plastic curtain. The inner room was perhaps 10 by 10 feet, with the same metal rings bolted into the walls and floor that they had found at the warehouse. But unlike the warehouse, this room was pristine, unused. A cot in the corner still had sheets folded at its foot. A chemical toilet sat sealed in its packaging. Bottles of water were stacked neatly against one wall. He prepared this but never used it, Dr. Reeves said. The warehouse was compromised in 2004 when the building was cited for violations. He must have set this up as a backup location, but for whatever reason, he stopped before he could transfer his operations here. Or someone else stopped him, Marcus suggested. The car accident in 2006. Maybe that wasn't an accident at all. Laura photographed the room methodically, her mind racing through possibilities. We need to check every inch of this place. If Robert kept this detailed of records, there might be information about his son, about what Daniel knew or was involved in. The search took hours. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple, the forensics team had filled 3 evidence vans with materials recovered from the storage unit. Laura sat in her car, reviewing photographs on her laptop while Marcus coordinated with the team still processing the scene. One particular set of files caught her attention, a folder labeled simply DH. Inside were letters, apparently written by Daniel Hendricks to his father but never sent. She began reading the first one, dated 1997. Dad, I understand now what you've been trying to teach me, about how people reveal their true nature under pressure, about how the masks they wear in everyday life fall away when they're stripped of comfort and control. I watched through the camera today when you brought food to the couple from Denver. The way she looked at him with such resentment when he tried to comfort her, you were right. 3 months ago she would have died for him. Now she flinches when he touches her. The transformation is remarkable. Laura felt sick reading it, but she forced herself to continue through the letters, each one revealing more of Daniel's gradual indoctrination into his father's twisted worldview. The final letter was dated March 2003. Dad, I know you're angry about the warehouse situation, about having to shut everything down because of the code violations and the increased scrutiny. But maybe this is an opportunity. Your methods were effective, but they left too many traces. I've been thinking about how to evolve the work, make it cleaner, more sustainable. What if we didn't keep them in one location? What if we moved them, made them part of a circuit where no single place would draw attention? I've been researching properties in Arizona and New Mexico, places remote enough that no one would notice. We could expand the project, increase our understanding. I want to help you perfect this. I want to be worthy of what you're teaching me. Laura closed the laptop, her hands clenched into fists. Daniel Hendricks wasn't just continuing his father's work. He was improving on it. The fact that he had gone dark in 2012 didn't mean he had stopped. It meant he had learned to leave no trail. Her phone rang, making her jump. It was Lieutenant Corrigan. Vasquez, we got a hit on Daniel Hendricks' DNA. It matches a profile in CODIS from an unsolved assault case in Phoenix in 2011. A hotel maid reported being attacked by a maintenance worker who tried to drug her, but she fought back and escaped. The attacker fled before police arrived. She gave a description that matches Daniel Hendricks, but without a suspect in custody, the case went cold. A hotel, Laura repeated, something clicking in her mind. Marcus, get over here. Marcus jogged to the car, and Laura quickly explained what Lieutenant Corrigan had told her. Robert worked in casinos. Daniel learned from his father. What if he's still working in hospitality? Hotels, casinos, anywhere he'd have access to guests, to their schedules, to people who were traveling and might not be immediately missed. Marcus pulled out his phone, already typing. I'll get someone started on employment records for every hotel and casino in Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. Anyone hired under an alias who matches Daniel's description or skill set. And check for patterns, Laura added. Missing persons, unsolved disappearances, any case involving couples or individuals who vanished while staying at hotels in those states. If he's operating the way his letters suggested, moving victims through a circuit of locations, there should be a pattern we can trace. As Marcus made the calls, Laura stared out at the storage unit, now blazing with portable lights as the forensics team continued their work. Robert Hendricks had operated for over a decade before his location was discovered, and only circumstance had ended his activities. His son had learned from those mistakes, had disappeared into the infrastructure of the American Southwest, where thousands of people moved through hotels and casinos every day, anonymous and vulnerable. Somewhere out there, Daniel Hendricks was watching, selecting, and perfecting the horror his father had begun. Rebecca Chen stood in her daughter's childhood bedroom, untouched for 26 years except for regular dusting. The posters on the walls had faded, the books on the shelves had aged, but everything remained exactly as Sarah had left it the day she departed for graduate school. Rebecca had preserved it like a shrine, unable to let go even as the years stretched into decades. Now, with Sarah's fate finally known, the room felt different. Not quite a memorial, but no longer a waiting room for a return that would never come. Rebecca sat on the edge of the bed, holding a shoebox filled with letters Sarah had sent during her final months. From college, from Chicago, and those last few from Las Vegas. She had read them countless times, searching for clues, but now she read them differently, looking for the moments of joy that Robert Hendricks had stolen. Sarah's descriptions of meeting Michael, of falling in love, of planning their future together. The excitement in her handwriting when she wrote about the Vegas trip, about spending Christmas somewhere warm and bright. "Mom, I know you wanted us home for the holiday, but Michael surprised me with these tickets, and the hotel looks amazing. We'll call you Christmas morning, I promise. I'll bring you back something tacky from the gift shop, maybe one of those snow globes with fake snow and palm trees. I love you. Don't worry about me. I'm happy." Rebecca's phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Detective Vasquez's number appeared on the screen. "Miss Chen, I hope I'm not calling too late." "I don't sleep much anyway," Rebecca replied. "Have you found something?" "Possibly. We recovered extensive records from Robert Hendricks's storage unit, including detailed files on every victim. I'm going through them now with the team, and I wanted to ask you about something Sarah mentioned in one of her journal entries." There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. She wrote about hearing someone else through the walls, someone new who arrived around day 127 of her captivity. That would place it in late April 1999. Do you remember hearing about any missing persons cases around that time? Anyone who might fit Hendricks's victim profile? Rebecca closed her eyes, her memory filing through years of accumulated research. April 1999. Yes, a couple from San Diego disappeared during a weekend trip to Vegas for their anniversary. Jordan and Lisa Keller. They were both 29, married for 3 years. They checked into the Desert Inn on April 23rd and never checked out. I added them to my list because of the date. It was their anniversary, another celebration. The Desert Inn, Laura repeated. Robert Hendricks worked there from 1997 to 2000. Miss Chen, your records might help us identify several other victims. Would you be willing to come to the station tomorrow and walk us through your research? Of course. Detective, have you made any progress finding Daniel Hendricks? Laura hesitated before answering. We're following several leads. His DNA was connected to an assault case in Phoenix in 2011, and we're working to trace his movements since then. But, Ms. Chen, I need to be honest with you. If Daniel learned from his father's mistakes, he may have become very good at hiding. After the call ended, Rebecca returned to Sarah's letters, but found herself unable to continue reading. Instead, she went downstairs to her office, where she had spent thousands of hours over the past 26 years compiling data on missing persons, cross-referencing dates and locations, building theories that most people dismissed as the obsessive grief of a mother who couldn't accept her loss. The walls were covered with maps, timelines, and photographs. Red pins marked disappearances that matched Hendricks's pattern. Blue pins indicated possible locations he had access to. Yellow pins showed unsolved cases from after 2006, cases that might be connected to Daniel if he had continued his father's work. Rebecca had been right all along, and the vindication felt hollow. She had been correct about the pattern, about the targeting of celebrations and joy, about a predator who moved through Las Vegas, selecting victims with methodical patience. But knowing the truth didn't bring Sarah back. It only replaced 26 years of unknowing with the horrifying certainty of what her daughter had endured. She pulled down a box from the top shelf of her closet, one she had kept separate from her main investigation files. Inside were items Sarah had left at home when she moved out. Childhood drawings, school papers, a diary from when she was 13. Rebecca hadn't looked at these in years, had been afraid that revisiting Sarah's childhood happiness would make the loss unbearable. Now she opened the diary carefully, reading entries about crushes on boys in her class, complaints about homework, excitement about a trip to the museum. The handwriting was rounder, less controlled than the precise script Sarah had developed as an adult. Rebecca traced the words with her finger, this evidence of her daughter's innocence and youth, preserved on paper like pressed flowers. A photograph fell from between the pages. Sarah, at age 13, standing in front of the Art Institute of Chicago on a school field trip. She was smiling, braces catching the sunlight, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked so young, so full of potential and future. Rebecca stared at the photograph for a long time, then carefully placed it in a frame on her desk, next to a photo of Sarah and Michael from Christmas 1997, their last Christmas together before Vegas. In the earlier photo, Sarah was a child. In the later one, she was a woman in love, her arm around Michael's waist, both of them laughing at something off camera. These were the moments Robert Hendricks had studied and dissected, trying to understand joy so he could destroy it. But he had missed something fundamental. The joy itself wasn't in the moment he captured or the suffering he inflicted. It was in the love that persisted beyond both, in a mother who had searched for 26 years, in the preservation of memory despite pain. Rebecca turned to her computer and opened the database she had created, the one the police were now using to identify victims. She had work to do, names to confirm, families to help find closure, a list of missing persons who deserved to have their stories told and their fates known. If Sarah's suffering had to have meaning, then perhaps it could be this. The meticulous records she had kept, the observations she had documented, might save someone else. Somewhere, Daniel Hendricks was still operating. Somewhere, he might be selecting his next victim. And Rebecca would not rest until he was found. Meanwhile, 800 miles away in a small town outside Albuquerque, a man who called himself David Hart finished his shift at the Desert Rose Hotel and Casino. He was 42, medium height, with thinning brown hair and the kind of unremarkable face that people forgot moments after seeing it. He wore the maintenance supervisor uniform with casual authority, keys jangling at his belt, and moved through the hotel with the confidence of someone who belonged. In the security office, he reviewed footage from the afternoon, watching as a couple in their late 20s checked in, excited and affectionate. The woman wore a small diamond ring, recently engaged, he assessed. They were from Texas, judging by their accent in the clip where they spoke to the front desk clerk. They had booked a suite for 5 nights to celebrate their engagement. David made a note in his personal phone, encrypted and backed up to a secure cloud server that couldn't be traced to him. Young couple, celebratory trip, trusting demeanor. He watched them walk toward the elevators, studying their body language, the way they touched each other, the joy evident in their movements. Not yet, he told himself. He had learned patience from his father's mistakes. Robert had moved too quickly sometimes, had taken risks when the impulse struck. Daniel had refined the process, had learned to wait and watch and select only when conditions were perfect. He had properties in 3 states now, never keeping anyone in one place for more than a month, moving them through a circuit that left no pattern anyone could trace. The couple from Texas would be evaluated over the next few days. He would learn their routines, their vulnerabilities, their capacity for trust. And if they met his criteria, if they proved to be suitable subjects for study, then arrangements would be made. But carefully, always carefully. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Another development in the Las Vegas case. The warehouse discovery was all over the media now. Reporters speculating about a serial killer. Investigators appealing for information. David read the article with clinical interest, noting that they had found his father's storage unit in Pahrump, that they were piecing together the timeline of victims. They were smart, he acknowledged. Smarter than the investigators his father had avoided for so many years. But they were still working backward, trying to understand the past. They weren't thinking about the present, about how methodology evolves, about how the lessons of failure lead to perfection. David deleted the news alert and cleared his browsing history. Tomorrow he would continue his observations of the couple from Texas. He would be patient, methodical, invisible, just as his father had taught him, refined by his own innovations and caution. Somewhere in Las Vegas, detectives were searching for Daniel Hendricks. But Daniel Hendricks no longer existed. He had shed that identity like a snake shedding skin, had learned to become whatever name and face he needed to be. David Hart was just one of several identities he maintained, each with legitimate employment records, each with a carefully constructed background that would withstand casual scrutiny. They would never find him, because they were looking for a person, when what they really needed to find was a pattern. And Daniel had made very sure his pattern was invisible. The task force conference room had transformed into something resembling a war room over the past week. The whiteboard had been replaced by large digital displays showing maps, timelines, and photographs of victims both identified and unknown. Laura stood before the screens at 7 in the morning, coffee in hand, studying the patterns that were slowly emerging from the data. Marcus entered with a box of case files from records, setting them down heavily on the table. I pulled every missing persons case from Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico dating back to 2006, the year Robert Hendricks died. Filtered for couples or pairs traveling for celebratory purposes. We have 47 potential cases that fit the basic profile. 47, Laura repeated, the number hitting her like a physical blow. In 18 years? That's if Daniel Hendricks continued at the same rate as his father, roughly 2 to 3 victims per year. But these are just the cases we know about, people who were reported missing. There could be others, transients or individuals without family to report them gone. Dr. Hampton arrived next, carrying her completed psychological profile. She looked exhausted, her usually precise appearance slightly disheveled. I've analyzed everything we recovered from the storage unit. Robert's journals, Daniel's letters, the transcripts of conversations with victims. What we're dealing with is more complex than a traditional serial killer profile. She pulled up a slide on one of the displays. Robert Hendricks exhibited characteristics of both organized and sadistic offenders, but his primary motivation wasn't sexual gratification or power in the traditional sense. He was conducting what he perceived as legitimate research into human emotional deterioration. His journals read almost like scientific observations, clinical, detached, methodical. He was insane, Marcus said bluntly. Actually, no. That's what makes this so disturbing. Robert Hendricks showed no signs of psychosis or detachment from reality. He understood that his actions were illegal and would be perceived as morally wrong by society. He simply didn't care because he believed his research was valuable. He saw himself as a kind of philosopher-scientist, testing theories about the nature of human attachment and suffering. Laura set down her coffee, her stomach turning. And Daniel? Daniel is more dangerous because he's more emotionally invested in the work. His letters show progression from reluctant observer to active participant to innovator. While Robert saw his victims as experimental subjects, Daniel developed a kind of reverence for the process itself. He doesn't just want to observe suffering, he wants to perfect it, elevate it to an art form. Lieutenant Corrigan entered with Rebecca Chen following close behind. Ms. Chen has been working with our database analyst to cross-reference her research with our recovered files. She's identified 3 more victims from Robert's documentation. Rebecca moved to the displays, her movements precise and controlled despite the dark circles under her eyes. Jordan and Lisa Keller, missing April 1999. Thomas and Jennifer Wu, missing July 4th weekend, 2001. And Michael and Patricia Dawson, missing Valentine's Day, 2003. She pointed to each set of photographs as she spoke. I've contacted their families. They're all willing to provide DNA samples for comparison with the remains found at the warehouse. That brings us to 18 identified victims, Laura said. We're still working on the others. Detectives, the database analyst called from his laptop at the corner of the table. I think I found something. You asked me to look for employment records matching Daniel Hendricks' profile across multiple hospitality industry positions in the Southwest. I cross-referenced with Social Security numbers that showed activity after 2012, when Daniel supposedly went dark. He pulled up a spreadsheet on the main display. 5 different names, all with similar work histories: maintenance supervisor or facilities management at hotels and casinos. Each identity was used for 2 to 3 years, then abandoned before moving to the next. The employment dates don't overlap, suggesting one person moving between identities. Laura leaned forward, studying the list. David Hart, Marcus Webb, Daniel Morrison, Jason Fletcher, Robert Fields. Where are these people now? That's the interesting part. 4 of the identities have gone inactive. No employment, no tax records, nothing. But David Hart is still active. Currently employed at the Desert Rose Hotel and Casino in Bernalillo, New Mexico. Started there in January 2022. Almost 3 years, Marcus said. That's longer than the pattern would suggest for his other identities. Dr. Hampton studied the information. He might be feeling secure there. The location is relatively isolated, and New Mexico has fewer resources for investigating missing persons than Nevada or Arizona. If he's established himself well at the Desert Rose, he might see it as a sustainable long-term position. Laura was already pulling up information about the Desert Rose on her phone. It's a smaller casino hotel. About 200 rooms, primarily serves locals and tourists visiting Albuquerque. Regular staff of around 50 employees. She looked up at Lieutenant Corrigan. We need to contact New Mexico State Police and coordinate surveillance. If David Hart is really Daniel Hendricks, we can't risk spooking him before we have enough evidence for an arrest. Agreed, the lieutenant said. But we also need to move carefully. If he suspects we're onto him, he could disappear again or destroy evidence. We need to confirm his identity first. I can help with that, Rebecca said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. Send me his employee photo from the Desert Rose. I spent 26 years studying every image I could find of Robert Hendricks, learning his features, his mannerisms. If Daniel inherited his father's appearance, I might be able to identify similarities. Marcus pulled up the employee records from the Desert Rose's database, obtained through a subpoena they had filed that morning. David Hart's photo appeared on screen. A middle-aged man with thinning hair, wearing the hotel's maintenance uniform, his expression neutral and professional. Rebecca stood and walked closer to the screen, studying the face with an intensity that made the room fall silent. After a long moment, she pointed to specific features. The eyes, the shape of the face around the jawline, the way his left eyebrow sits slightly higher than his right. Robert Hendricks had all of these characteristics. This could absolutely be his son. Could be isn't enough for an arrest warrant, Lieutenant Corrigan said. But it's enough to justify deeper investigation. Vasquez, Zhao, I want you in New Mexico tomorrow. Coordinate with state police, but keep this tight. Limited personnel who know the real target. Officially, you're investigating a series of missing persons cases in the area. Laura nodded, her mind already running through logistics. We'll need surveillance on Hart's movements both at work and at home. We need to identify any properties he has access to, any storage units, any place he might be keeping someone. There's something else, the database analyst said, pulling up another file. I searched missing persons reports in the Albuquerque area for the past 3 years, filtered by couples or individuals traveling for celebrations. I found 2 cases that fit the pattern. Amanda Morrison and Tyler Chen, engaged couple from El Paso, disappeared in March 2023 after checking into the Desert Rose for a weekend getaway. And Kevin and Melissa Torres, married couple from Phoenix, vanished in November 2023 during their 10th anniversary trip to Santa Fe. Last known location was the Desert Rose, where they stopped for dinner. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. 2 couples in less than a year, both with connections to the Desert Rose Hotel. He's still active, Marcus said grimly. And if he's following his father's pattern, if he's keeping them alive for months before killing them, then someone might still be alive, Laura finished. Someone we can save if we move fast enough. Rebecca's hand had moved to cover her mouth, her eyes fixed on the photographs of Amanda Morrison and Tyler Chen, young and smiling in their engagement photo. Don't let them suffer like Sarah did, she whispered. Please, find them while there's still time. Lieutenant Corrigan stood, her expression set with determination. Vasquez, Zhao, you leave in 3 hours. I'll have the New Mexico State Police Commander briefed by the time you arrive. This is now our highest priority. If David Hart is Daniel Hendricks, and if he has someone captive right now, every hour counts. Laura gathered her files, her mind already shifting into operational mode. But as she prepared to leave, Rebecca caught her arm. Detective, when you find him, when you arrest him, I want to be there. I want him to see me and know that Sarah's mother never stopped looking, that his father's mistakes led us straight to him. Laura met her eyes, seeing the steel beneath the grief. I can't promise that, Ms. Chen, but I can promise we'll get justice for Sarah and all the others. That has to be enough. Rebecca nodded slowly, releasing her grip. Then make sure he knows their names, every single one of them. Make sure he understands that they weren't experiments or subjects. They were people, and they're remembered. As Laura left the conference room, she felt the weight of 18 identified victims and countless unknown others pressing against her shoulders. Somewhere in New Mexico, a man who had learned evil from his father was continuing to perfect it. But for the first time in 26 years, someone was close enough to stop him. The hunt was no longer theoretical. It was a race against time, and the clock was already running. The Desert Rose Hotel and Casino sat like a mirage on the edge of Bernalillo, its pink stucco facade and palm trees incongruous against the high desert landscape. Laura and Marcus arrived just after sunset, the building's neon sign flickering to life as they pulled into the parking lot of a nondescript office building 3 blocks away, the temporary command center New Mexico State Police had established for the operation. Inside, they found Detective Ramon Gutierrez of the NMSP, a compact man in his early 40s with sharp eyes and the careful demeanor of someone who had worked undercover for years. He had a laptop open on the table, surveillance footage from the Desert Rose playing on the screen. We've been watching Hart for the past 8 hours, Gutierrez said by way of greeting. He arrived for his shift at 2 p.m., standard maintenance supervisor duties, checking rooms, coordinating with housekeeping, supervising repairs. Nothing unusual. He clocked out at 10 p.m. and drove straight home to an apartment complex on the north side of town. Any indication he's noticed the surveillance? Marcus asked. None. We're using long-range observation, rotating vehicles, staying back. He has no reason to think anyone's watching. Gutierrez pulled up a map on his laptop. Hart's been at the Desert Rose for nearly 3 years. Before that, we have gaps in his employment history that match the pattern you identified. He's renting a 2-bedroom apartment under the David Hart identity, drives a 10-year-old Toyota Camry, pays his bills on time. On paper, he's completely unremarkable. That's the point, Laura said, studying the surveillance footage. David Hart moved through the hotel with the invisible efficiency of someone who had perfected the art of being overlooked. What about property records? Storage units, vacant buildings, anywhere he might have access? That's where it gets interesting, Gutierrez replied, pulling up another file. Hart doesn't own any property, but we found something in his rental history. Before moving to the apartment in Bernalillo, he rented a house in Placitas for 14 months, from January 2022 to March 2023. When he moved out, the landlord noted some unusual modifications to the basement, soundproofing materials on the walls, a reinforced door that Hart said he installed for a home recording studio. The landlord made him remove the door before leaving, but the soundproofing stayed because it would have been too expensive to tear out. Laura felt her pulse quicken. March 2023. That's when Amanda Morrison and Tyler Chen disappeared. Exactly. We've obtained a warrant to search the property. The current tenants moved in last month and are cooperating fully. We can execute the search tonight if you want to be present. Absolutely, Marcus said. What about Hart's current apartment? We're working on a warrant for that too, but it's trickier. We need probable cause beyond circumstantial employment patterns and rental history. The judge wants more direct evidence connecting Hart to the missing persons cases. Laura turned to the surveillance footage again, watching Hart interact with a housekeeper, his body language relaxed and professional. What about his digital footprint? Phone records, internet activity, social media? David Hart has a basic cell phone, makes very few calls, mostly work-related. No social media presence at all. Internet usage at his apartment is minimal. News sites, streaming services, nothing that raises flags. It's almost too clean, like he's deliberately maintaining a low profile. Because he is, Laura said. His father kept detailed records that eventually helped identify him. Daniel learned from that mistake. He's minimizing anything that could create a pattern or be traced. Gutierrez checked his watch. The warrant for the Placitas property came through 20 minutes ago. The search team is assembling now. We can be there in 30 minutes. The drive to Placitas took them into the foothills of the Sandia Mountains, where scattered houses clung to the slopes between piñon pines and juniper trees. The rental property was a small adobe-style home at the end of a gravel road, isolated from its nearest neighbor by a quarter-mile of scrub brush and rocky terrain. 3 NMSP vehicles were already there, along with a forensics van. The current tenants, a retired couple in their 60s, stood near their car, watching nervously as officers prepared to search the property they had been living in for less than a month. Laura approached them, showing her credentials. Mr. and Mrs. Hoffman, I'm Detective Vasquez from Las Vegas Metro. I understand this must be unsettling, but we appreciate your cooperation. Mrs. Hoffman, a thin woman with silver hair, nodded anxiously. When they told us we needed to evacuate for a police search, I was terrified. Is our home dangerous? Should we have been living here? We have no reason to believe you're in any danger, Laura assured her. We're investigating activities that occurred before you moved in. The previous tenant, David Hart, did he leave anything behind? Any belongings? Any indication of what he was doing here? Nothing, Mr. Hoffman replied. The place was completely empty when we moved in. Well, except for the basement. That soundproofing material on the walls. We thought it was strange, but the landlord said the previous tenant was some kind of musician. May we see the basement? The Hoffmans led them inside, through a modestly furnished living room and kitchen, to a door that opened onto wooden stairs descending into darkness. Laura flipped the light switch, revealing a finished basement with concrete floors and walls covered in acoustic foam panels. The space was perhaps 20 by 30 feet, with exposed ceiling beams and a small window near the ceiling that had been covered from the inside with black paint. The soundproofing was professional grade, the kind used in recording studios. But something about the configuration felt wrong. The panels covered every wall completely, even in corners where they would serve no acoustic purpose. Dr. Reeves, Laura called up the stairs. You need to see this. The medical examiner descended carefully, his eyes scanning the space with the same unease Laura felt. He pulled out a small knife and approached one of the wall panels, carefully prying it away from the concrete. Behind it, the wall was bare except for several metal rings bolted into the concrete, identical to those found in Robert Hendricks's spaces. He was holding people here, Dr. Reeves said quietly. These rings are for restraints. Marcus was photographing everything, his expression grim. The window is painted black from the inside. The soundproofing would prevent anyone from hearing screams, and we're a quarter-mile from the nearest neighbor. This was a functional prison. Laura examined the floor carefully, noting faint discoloration in several spots that might be biological evidence. We need luminol testing, full forensic sweep. If Amanda Morrison and Tyler Chen were held here, there should be traces of their presence. The forensics team worked through the night, carefully removing panels and testing every surface for DNA, blood, and other biological evidence. Laura and Marcus watched from the stairs, too wired to leave despite exhaustion creeping in around the edges of their vision. At 3 a.m, one of the forensic technicians called them over. Detectives, we found something. She indicated a section of concrete floor near the corner of the basement. There are initials carved into the concrete here, very faint. Someone used something sharp, maybe a nail or piece of metal, to scratch letters. AM and TC. Amanda Morrison and Tyler Chen. Laura photographed the initials carefully, her hands steady despite the rage building in her chest. They were here! They were alive here, and they tried to leave evidence that they existed. There's more, the technician said, moving to another corner. Here and here, other initials, KT and MT, at least 4 different sets we've found so far, Kevin and Melissa Torres, the couple from Phoenix who disappeared in November 2023. How long would they have to be here to have the opportunity to carve these? Marcus asked. Dr. Reeves knelt beside the markings, examining them closely. These weren't done in one session. The depth and pressure vary, suggesting someone working on them over multiple days or weeks, probably when they were alone and had access to something sharp. This takes time and desperation. Laura straightened, pulling out her phone to call Detective Gutierrez. We have enough for an arrest warrant now. We have physical evidence connecting Hart to at least 2 missing persons cases, evidence of imprisonment, and the pattern matches everything we know about Daniel Hendricks. Where is Hart right now? Still at his apartment, Gutierrez replied immediately. Surveillance team reports his lights went off at 11 p.m. and haven't come back on. No movement. Maintain surveillance but prepare to move in. We're coming back to Bernalillo now. I want to execute the arrest at first light, catch him when he's leaving for work. Maximum control, minimal risk of him destroying evidence or fleeing. The drive back to Bernalillo passed in tense silence. Laura's mind raced through tactical considerations. How to approach the arrest, what to tell Hart, how to leverage the evidence they had found to get him to reveal the current location of his victims, if any were still alive. Because that was the terrifying question underlying everything. If Amanda Morrison and Tyler Chen had carved their initials into the basement floor of the Placidus house, but Hart had moved out of that property over a year ago, where were they now? Where had he taken them when he relocated to Bernalillo? By 5 a.m., the arrest team was assembled in the parking lot of Hart's apartment complex. 12 officers, all briefed on the potential danger, all aware they were dealing with someone who had learned criminal methodology from a serial killer father. Laura wore a bulletproof vest over her clothes, her service weapon checked and holstered. He leaves for work at 1:30 p.m., Gutierrez said quietly, reviewing the surveillance logs. But we can't wait that long. We need to secure him before he has any opportunity to communicate with anyone or access any location where he might be holding victims. At 5:30 a.m., as the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, the team moved into position. 2 officers covered the back exit of Hart's ground floor apartment, while Laura, Marcus, and 4 others approached the front door. Gutierrez stood ready with a battering ram, though they hoped to avoid forced entry if possible. Laura knocked firmly on the door. David Hart, this is the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police. We need to speak with you. Silence. Then the sound of footsteps inside, slow and unhurried. The door opened to reveal David Hart wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, his hair disheveled from sleep. His expression confused, but not alarmed. Can I help you? He asked, his voice thick with sleep. Is something wrong at the hotel? Laura held up her badge. David Hart, also known as Daniel Hendricks, you're under arrest for kidnapping and suspicion of murder. Put your hands behind your back. For just a moment, Hart's carefully neutral expression cracked. His eyes widened slightly, and Laura saw something flicker across his face. Not fear, but surprise and something else. Disappointment, perhaps, or resignation. Then the mask returned. I think you have the wrong person. My name is David Hart. I don't know anyone named Daniel Hendricks. We know who you are, Marcus said, moving forward with handcuffs. We know about your father Robert, about the warehouse in Las Vegas, about the storage unit in Pahrump. We know about the house in Placidus. We found the initials carved into the floor. Hart's expression remained neutral as Marcus cuffed his hands, but his eyes never left Laura's face. I want a lawyer. You'll get one, Laura replied. But first, you're going to tell us where Amanda Morrison, Tyler Chen, Kevin Torres, and Melissa Torres are right now. If any of them are still alive, if there's any chance we can save them, This is your only opportunity to do something decent. Hart smiled then, a small, cold smile that reminded Laura viscerally of the photographs she had seen of Robert Hendricks. Detective, if you've really studied my father's work, then you know the answer to that question. You know exactly how long his subjects survived on average. Do the math. Your father kept people for 8 months, Laura said, stepping closer. Amanda Morrison and Tyler Chen disappeared 18 months ago, but you moved out of the Placidus house after 14 months. Where did you take them? Hart's smile widened slightly. You're very thorough, Detective. I can see why you found me. My father would have appreciated your dedication. He paused, considering. I'll tell you this much. My father's methods were crude, keeping everyone in one location. I improved on his design, mobility, rotation, distributed resources. Much more sustainable, much harder to trace. Where are they? Marcus demanded, his voice hard. We have evidence of at least 4 victims in your custody. Tell us where they are, and maybe the DA will consider cooperation when it comes to sentencing. I'd like to speak with my lawyer now, Hart repeated, his tone pleasant and unhurried, as if they were discussing something mundane. I have nothing further to say. As officers led Hart to a waiting police car, Laura felt frustration and fury warring in her chest. They had him in custody, had evidence connecting him to multiple disappearances, but without knowing where he was currently keeping victims, without finding his current operational location, they might have 4 more families joining Rebecca Chen in her grief. Gutierrez approached as Hart was placed in the cruiser. We're executing the search warrant on his apartment now, and I've got teams checking every property within 50 miles that might be connected to him. Storage units, vacant buildings, anything. He said, distributed resources, Laura said, watching the police car pull away with Hart in the back seat. Multiple locations, rotating victims between them. He could have spaces in 3 or 4 different places, move people every few weeks to avoid detection. Then we'll search every place he's ever had access to, Marcus replied grimly. Starting with the Desert Rose Hotel itself. If he's been working there for 3 years, he might have created spaces inside the building, just like his father did at the casinos. Laura pulled out her phone, calling Lieutenant Corrigan to update her on the arrest. As she explained the situation, she watched the sunrise painting the Sandia Mountains in shades of pink and gold, beautiful and indifferent to the horror that had been unfolding beneath its light. They had caught Daniel Hendricks, ended his ability to select and take new victims, but somewhere, possibly within hours or days of death, 4 people might still be trapped in spaces he had prepared, running out of time while detectives searched desperately for locations that had been designed to remain hidden. The race wasn't over. In many ways, it had just become more desperate. 6 months later, Rebecca Chen stood in a cemetery in Chicago, where Sarah's remains had finally been laid to rest beside her father, whose body had been recovered from the limestone sinkhole in Texas, where Robert Hendricks had disposed of it 26 years earlier. The double funeral had been attended by hundreds, family, friends, former classmates, and representatives from 15 other families whose loved ones had been identified among Robert Hendricks's victims. The investigation into Daniel Hendricks had uncovered 3 additional locations in New Mexico and Arizona where he had held victims. The search had been desperate and exhaustive, with teams working around the clock to trace every property he had access to, every storage unit he had rented under various names, every abandoned building in the areas where he had worked. They had found Amanda Morrison in a concealed room beneath a storage facility in Socorro, New Mexico, 38 days after Daniel's arrest. She was severely malnourished, dehydrated, and traumatized beyond measure, but alive. Tyler Chen had been found with her, though he had died 3 days before the discovery, his body still in the room where they had been kept. Kevin Torres and Melissa Torres were found in a modified shipping container buried on a property outside Phoenix that Daniel had access to through yet another false identity. Both were deceased, having succumbed to dehydration approximately 2 weeks after Daniel's arrest. unable to escape the container that had been designed to be undetectable from the outside. The discovery of Amanda Morrison alive had been a bittersweet victory. She had survived, but the cost of that survival would echo through the rest of her life. She was currently in psychiatric care, slowly beginning the long process of healing from 18 months of captivity. Daniel Hendricks had refused to cooperate with investigators, maintaining his silence except through his attorney. He would face trial in New Mexico for kidnapping and murder, with additional charges pending in Nevada and Arizona. The death penalty was being sought in all 3 states. Rebecca laid white roses on Sarah and Michael's shared headstone, her fingers tracing the engraved words, "Together in joy, reunited in peace." It wasn't the ending she had wanted. No mother wanted her child's story to end in a criminal's basement, but it was an ending, which was more than she had had for 26 years. Detective Laura Vasquez stood a respectful distance away, having flown to Chicago specifically for the funeral. When Rebecca was ready, she approached quietly. "Miss Chen." Rebecca turned, and to Laura's surprise, she smiled slightly. "Thank you for coming, Detective. You didn't have to." "Yes, I did. Your daughter helped us catch him. The records she kept, the observations she documented, they were crucial in building the pattern that led us to Daniel." Rebecca nodded, looking back at the headstone. Sarah was always meticulous. Even as a child, she kept journals, made lists, documented everything. Her voice caught slightly. I suppose in the end, that precision gave her a way to fight back, even when she couldn't physically escape. They stood in silence for a moment, watching as other mourners placed flowers on the graves of Jim, Sarah, and Michael Torres, whose family had chosen to bury him in Chicago near Sarah, honoring the love that Robert Hendricks had tried to destroy. "Have you given any thought to what you'll do now?" Laura asked gently. "You've spent so much of your life searching. Now that you have answers—" "I'm not stopping," Rebecca interrupted firmly. "There are still unidentified remains from the warehouse, still missing persons who might have been victims of Robert or Daniel that we haven't connected yet. And there are other cases, other families still searching, still wondering." She met Laura's eyes. "I'm starting a foundation, using my research methods to help law enforcement identify patterns in missing persons cases. Sarah's Foundation for the Missing. If my 26 years of obsessive investigation can help even one other family find answers sooner, then maybe some good came from all of this." Laura felt a lump form in her throat. "That's remarkable, Ms. Chen. Sarah would be proud." "Maybe," Rebecca said softly. "Or maybe she'd tell me I should rest, should let the professionals handle it, should try to rebuild the life I put on hold when she disappeared." She smiled sadly. "But I can't. This is who I am now, a mother who knows what it's like to search endlessly and who wants to make that search easier for others." They exchanged contact information, Laura promising to send any resources that might help with the Foundation's work. As she prepared to leave, Rebecca called after her. "Detective, Amanda Morrison, the woman you found alive. Will you tell her something for me?" "Of course. Tell her that survival is enough. She doesn't need to justify being the one who lived, doesn't need to find meaning in her suffering. She just needs to keep breathing, keep existing, and eventually, that will be enough to build on. Tell her Sarah's mother said that." Laura nodded, not trusting her voice to speak. As she walked back to her rental car, Laura passed through sections of the cemetery where other Hendricks victims had been buried. In their hometowns, near their families, finally home after years in an unmarked grave in a Las Vegas warehouse. 18 confirmed victims of Robert Hendricks and 7 confirmed victims of Daniel, with investigations ongoing into 12 other disappearances that might be connected. 25 lives stolen by a father and son who had decided that observing human suffering was more valuable than human life itself. But they had been caught, their victims identified and mourned, their methods exposed and understood. And one survivor lived to bear witness to what had happened in those hidden rooms, to prove that even the most carefully constructed horror could be escaped. Laura's phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Trial date set for Daniel Hendricks, March 15th. Prosecution is confident. She typed back a simple reply. Good. As she drove away from the cemetery, Laura thought about Rebecca Chen creating a foundation from her grief, about Amanda Morrison beginning her long journey toward healing, about 15 other families who finally had closure after years of uncertainty. The case would stay with her forever. The faces of the victims, the cold efficiency of the Hendricks' methods, the desperate hope that had driven the investigation forward even when success seemed impossible. But most of all, she would remember Sarah Chen's final journal entry, the young woman who refused to let the last thought in her mind be of the room where she was dying, who chose instead to remember joy and love and a sunset at Navy Pier. That was the real victory over the Hendricks' philosophy, that even in the darkest moment, even at the very end, their victims maintained the humanity that their captors could never understand. The sun was setting over Chicago as Laura headed to the airport, painting the sky in the same shades of orange and pink that Sarah had described in her final thoughts. Somewhere in a secure facility, Daniel Hendricks sat in a cell, his methodology exposed, his pattern broken, his ability to harm anyone ever again permanently ended. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to balance the scales of what had been taken. But it was justice. And for the families who had waited decades for answers, justice was all that remained to give.